Have you been annihilated by T-Suns, busted in the face by Dark Angels Gladius with all those Deathwing Knights, or Sisters of Battle flaming you too much and you have no idea how to go on in life? Well, people, today we're going to be talking about the upcoming MFM or / balanced data slate. We don't know if it's actually going to be a balanced data slate or if it's going to be an MFM. Everyone says they know. You don't know. Every single time GW has done an update, they've done something a little bit different than what they said they were going to do. So there might be some balance in here. There might only be points. We don't know. Anyway, we need to know what are we going to do to make the game even more balanced. So that's what this video is today. I'm going to break down every single detachment, or not detachment, but every single codex or race in the game, and we're going to talk about what we need to do to balance them. It's actually a pretty quick video, surprisingly enough, because shockingly, we're in a pretty good balanced state. So let's just get into it. The very first thing I want to cover before I start talking about the in-depth army stuff, let's talk about the difference between points versus rules. There's a lot of different times in the game where points are straight up the problem. Like a unit is just too expensive or a unit is too cheap. Now, however, that doesn't always have to be the case. Sometimes the thing is that it doesn't matter how expensive a unit is, or it doesn't matter how cheap a unit is. It can still just suck. I think we're seeing this in Custodes, for example. The Custodes Virtus Praetor, or the bikes. They're just so bad that you won't take them. Like there's just no purpose in taking them. They're that bad. They can drop them another 20 points, and like you still won't see them because they are bad. So sometimes rules upgrades are necessary. So in some of these armies, when we're going through it, I might say, hey, I would like to see these points changed, or I would like to see these rules changed. Now, it is really important to note that this is actually the most balanced the game has ever freaking been. And I'm talking about the entire Pariah Nexus season. So it's like, overall, GW's doing a great job, and I'm really excited to see what they're coming out with. But these are my recommendations. These are my thoughts. If you agree with me, then I want to hear it. If you disagree with me, make sure you put it in bold letters and scream at me in the comments, because that's important. Anyway, let's get into it. This last little piece of information here. Win rate is not the only thing that I am basing my opinions on when it comes to how do you balance a codex. Win rate is very important. Like if an army has a 65% win rate, well, they need to be nerfed. But sometimes it's an individual rule that needs to be nerfed, or it's an individual unit that needs to be nerfed or buffed in order to make a big difference. It's not necessarily just the win rate of the army that matters. You have some armies that actually have a really low win rate, but for some reason they're super overperforming, and we're definitely going to see that in this video. So with the first army that we're going to talk about today, it is, of course, the Dark Eldar. All right, so Dark Eldar actually have the highest win rate in the game right now at a 58% win rate. Now, interestingly enough, Sky Splinter is at a 58% win rate, and Real Space Raiders is at an astonishing 65% win rate. Now, that is going to be a little bit higher right now just because of how well they performed last weekend. So it's not like a true number on the Real Space Raiders, but Dark Eldar are actually the highest win rate in the game right now, and this is very, very interesting. Coming from all the way at the bottom, the worst army in the game, to arguably the best. I still don't agree that they're the best, but they definitely have the highest win rate, and they do need to be scaled back just a little bit. Now, it's really important when we're doing these scaling backs that GW starts to learn from some of the errors of the past. You don't have to nerf something into oblivion. So my recommendation for approaching the Dark Eldar problem is very simple. Just a general 5% increase in points on most of the units in the army will make sure that Dark Eldar have to really choose. Do they actually want this enhancement, or are they okay playing with one less unit? This simple choice right here can absolutely be enough to drop them 3-4% in the win rates and still have a good freaking army. I'd much rather see them do a small nerf that maybe wasn't enough than over nerf and then have to correct in the future. So I'm thinking, generally speaking, we're going to want to see a 5 to 7% increase in most units in the game, in the army. Now, there are some exceptions to this. So for example, Grotesque do not need to go up in points. Grotesque probably needs to go down in points. So it's not as simple as just saying, make everything a little more expensive, but generally speaking, that's probably the best way to handle the Dark Eldar problem right now. All right, let's move on into T-Suns. Now, T-Suns also are at a 58% win rate. They are tied for the highest win rate in the game. Now, T-Suns have a unique issue. T-Suns, they actually have a very high floor for being good with the army. So most people who play T-Suns, generally speaking, they're probably going to struggle to use the army because they are a complicated army to use. However, they have an exceptionally high ceiling for the army. So if you do get good at T-Suns, you are going to be more or less unstoppable. If you have a T-Suns army on the battlefield today with today's army, and you do it correctly, you make no mistakes, I think you just win. There's basically no real army that can stop you, except for maybe one from like Chaos Cults. But it is that strong if you play a perfect game. Now, how easy is it to play a perfect game? I've never played a perfect game in my life, and I'm pretty damn good at the game. But that is something to consider. So when we take these nerfs into consideration, how do we do it? Especially when we combine it with the other nerfs T-Suns have already suffered. So we've nerfed the indirect spam. We've nerfed the indirect flamer ability. We've nerfed their cabals. We have nerfed the fact that they have to order their cabals now. The only other real nerf that I see being that won't make the army unplayable, but will definitely affect the army, is I think we need to see an increase in the points on Mutalisk. Mutalisk dropping down to that 150 is an absolute travesty. It is an insane data sheet for what it gives. Take that back up to the 170 or even the 180 level. I think we make that change, and we would very easily see T-Suns drop significantly. They'd probably still be above a 50% win rate, but making that one change is actually very, very significant. So I would like to see that change done, and then we can reevaluate in the future if more is necessary. I kind of think it wouldn't be. Mutalisks by themselves are that big a deal. Put those bad boys back up. Let's talk about the Sisters of Battle. Man, if you're in the Discord, you have seen some people complain about the Sisters of Battle. Now, these girls are actually, they're very good. And it's not Sisters of Battle as a whole that is a problem. It's really more or less the Bringers of Flame Detachment. The Bringers of Flame Detachment is actually having a 58% win rate, not the 56% of the entire army. So it's really kind of propping the army up quite a bit. Now, the problem with it is they just do an unbelievable amount of damage. So we need to figure out how to balance this without actually crushing the entire codex, because it's really only one detachment that's an issue. So I don't want to see sweeping points nerfs, seeing as Sisters of Battle is actually already pretty expensive. So I don't think points nerfs are really going to be the way to actually fix this issue. What I would like to see personally, and here's a few different options. One that we could do is we could keyword lock the advance and shoot. So perhaps advance and shoot only applies to vehicles, or perhaps it only applies to infantry, or whatever. If key locking that, making that ability just a little bit less good is a great way to bring down this one detachment without destroying the detachment and without destroying the entire army. You could also go through stratagems. For example, I think it's silly that Cleansing Flames is a 1 CP stratagem. For those of you who do not know, Cleansing Flames is a 1 CP stratagem that gives dev wounds to any flamer unit. And these girls can pop out units that have like 12 freaking flamers with additional shots to it. It's absolutely stupid the amount of dev wounds that they get for 1 CP. And a lot of times that's even a free CP because you got a canonist running them. So I would 100% increase the cost of this stratagem to at least 2 CP. I think that is a great start to really just bringing down the overall power of this one detachment without dramatically affecting the entire codex. And then as far as points are concerned, the only thing that I really see is just too cheap is probably the Castigator. The Castigator is just a little darn too cheap. I would like to see it get a tiny nerf. So just a little bit of maybe a 10-point boost is probably enough to make a big difference, because basically every Sisters list is taking 3 of these things. And a 30-point additions, having to add 30 points to your army really does make you make a few list choices. So I think that's probably the correct decision. I don't want to see sweeping points nerfs. I want to see some targeted things for the Bringers of Flame, which is the actual issue. Let's move on to the Space Wolves. Ow! These guys are actually sitting at a 55% win rate. Now, this is really weird. Champions of Rust is oddly currently at a 57% win rate. I believe this is like an artifact. Something tells me that you had a guy or a gal who just went crate psycho and just smashed a few tournaments in the last 2 to 3 weeks with Champions of Rust specifically, and no one knew what they were looking at, because Champions of Rust like previously was in the high 30s, and they haven't really done that much with it. So I'm assuming this is an artifact. You just have a really good player who's running it, which is really driving the win rates up, especially considering that Champions of Rust just is not run in general very often at all. So that's my assumption there. I could obviously be wrong, but that's it. So basically, with a 55% win rate, they are right on the chopping block for GW. GW says they really, that 55% win rate is the area that they do not want armies. So we know Space Wolves are almost certainly going to take a little bit of a hit. But is it the Space Wolves themselves, or is it the detachment? So, for example, the big detachment that's actually been causing a problem for everyone is going to be your Stormlance. This is where we get the term Wolf Jail, where we get like 3 units of wolves that just run up in your face turn 1, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I would recommend perhaps we can do some targeted changes to enhancement here or there. So for example, we could increase the cost of Hunter's Instincts from 10 points to 30, heck, even 45 points. That is the enhancement that allows you to come from strat reserves turn 1, basically just treating the round as a turn earlier. And that is a very, very big issue, seeing as you can, rapid ingress turn 1 with a huge wolf squad. So perhaps making a targeted change just to that, and maybe 1 or 2 other little small things, not necessarily sweeping points nerfs, because the problem with sweeping points nerfs is it's also going to hit Space Marines. And Space Marines, as we'll see, are not doing okay. So it's going to have to be targeted towards the things that are the problem. Like I said, I believe it's an artifact that Champions of Rust is doing so good. I think that's probably just on the week. But Stormlance is definitely where Wolf Jail is prominent, so we need to probably hit Stormlance a small bit. Let's look at Blood Angels. Blood Angels are currently at a 53% win rate, and there's really nothing to balance here because the index is dead. It's time to wait for the new codex to get the points on the new codex. The one thing I desperately want to see with the new codex is Sangard cannot come out at 50 points. If Sangard come out at 50 points, the codex is dead on arrival. 50 points is way too much. If you want to disagree with me, we'll fight. That's fine. Let's fight in the comments. All right, World Eaters. World Eaters sitting at that 53% win rate. This is that area where GW is really closely paying attention to the army, but they're not really a problem. So this is right about that level where GW is like, cool, we would ideally want everyone to be within 47 to that 53, but it's a bit of an issue. Or it's just something to keep an eye on. I don't necessarily think any points changes are really necessary at this point. You could maybe give a 5 points to an enhancement here or there, but overall, World Eaters are probably pretty fine, and they're just sitting at this level because that's what the meta is right now. All right, let's move on to Custodes. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. Custodes are currently at a 47% win rate, but there's an artifact here that is just unbelievable. There is a Null Maiden Vigil, which is currently at an astonishing 65% win rate. Here's the deal, guys. This is hilarious. Null Maiden Vigil is the worst attachment in the game. And sometimes stats get weird. What you have is you have a player, or maybe even 2 players, and they've been going to some GTs, and they have been just crushing people with Null Maiden Vigil. The only reason that would happen is if you have the best player in the world, and they are going hard. So since that's probably not happening, because I don't think Liam VSL is running Null Maiden Vigil, what's happening is you have some, and call me a jerk if you want, but in all reality, you probably have someone who's going to GTs, and they're going to really low-quality GTs, and they're beating up on brand new people with this army, and they're probably pretty good at the game. And they're also getting lucky. That's the only thing that's happened. I think this is just an example of sometimes stats are weird and you have a really bad thing that's doing really well and it's artificially pumping the win rate of the rest of the army up. So Null Maiden Vigil sucks. I don't think it needs to get nerfed. It's actually awful. If you haven't played it, then go play it and then tell me that it actually has earned that 65% win rate. You'll agree with me afterwards. All right. So here's the deal about Custodes. Custodes are not an army that really can be fixed by points. There's a few point changes that can happen, like maybe a character can come down 10 points or whatever, but you do not want to see a Horde Custode army. You do not want to see someone put down 30 Custode Guard and be like, have at ye, bro. It is not a good, oh my gosh, MSU Custode that would just have tons of these units would be a nightmare to play against. No one wants that, and no Custode player wants to run that either. So what I would do in order to just give Custodes the little bit of love that they need, first off, is I would give all detachments a 4-up, or I'm sorry, not a 4, a 6-up Feel No Pain against mortals. So similar to 9th edition, where you had the Emperor's Chosen detachment, which gave you a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds, and everyone else got a 6-up, I would just give everyone a 6-up. That by itself is just enough to really skew the damage from those flat 3 dev wound attacks that tend to come through. That I believe that just little tiny kiss there will give them just the edge they need in durability against your mortal wound output, that they would instantly go up a percentage or 2 in their win rates. Bikes need a data sheet rewrite. Bikes are just one of the worst units in the entire game. They're completely pointless, and it doesn't matter how many times they drop the points. No one's taking them because they're terrible. What I would recommend, let's put them back up to 5 wounds like they were in 9th edition. I would take them to T7, make them on par with a Terminator, with a Alaris Terminator's toughness, and then I would perhaps give them an innate AP3 on their lance. That would distinguish them and give them a very specific role in the army that is not served elsewhere. As it is right now, why would you ever run bikes when you could run Venatari? Well, this would give us a reason to do that. So I think this would be my recommended data sheet rewrite. I would also go ahead and give Trajan ignore all modifiers back. And the reason why I would do that is because Custodes, unlike some other armies, just have a few matchups where it is impossible for them to win. If you go against Necrons and the Necrons have 2 Satan, maybe 3 Satan, Custodes just straight up, it's impossible for them to win. They cannot, on average, kill a C'tan. Not a single unit can do it. The entire army is nothing but damage 2. It gets cut in half. The C'tan is always going to be wounded at 5. You can get rerolls. C'tans basically cannot die to Custodes, and that by itself invalidates the army in any real competitive sense, seeing as Necrons are one of the most popular armies out there. So I do think that we need to give them a way to deal with damage reduction, and that would be giving Trajan his ignore all modifiers back. You could also give them a strat that does it, but I think it's probably better just to give it back to Trajan, to be honest with you. And then for the love of God, give us assault keyword on Sagittarum's bolters, because Sagittarum are useless when they are move 6, and they have no way to get delivered. So give them assault. All right, Custodes rant done. Let's look at Chaos Space Marines. Now, Chaos Space Marines are one of the most interesting armies in the game right now. They are at a 46% win rate, so a little bit below where we want them. But they have a 73% win rate for Chaos Cult specifically. And Raiders, by the way, would be just as high if Cult wasn't the preferred way to run it. This does not mean Chaos Space Marines are too overpowered. They are not. Accursed Cultist with the Dark Commune is the problem. The Accursed Cultist Dark Commune blob is just too dang good. And in an army like Renegade Raiders or Chaos Cults, where you can buff them to the wazoo, it causes problems that just can't be dealt with. So overall, I would say CSM is actually slightly too expensive, but your Accursed Cultist with the Dark Commune is far too cheap. Here's what I would do if I was balancing Chaos Space Marines, just to give them a little bit of a love overall, but we also can't do that in the context of a Chaos Cult running around with a 73% win rate. So here's what I would do. I would increase the cost of your Accursed blobs by about 20 points and the Dark Commune by about 10 points. That would be 30 points per combination, which if you're taking 3 of those blobs, that's an additional 90 points onto the army, which is actually a pretty hard pill to swallow. Then I would also reverse a few of the other points nerfs. So for example, some of the units that we're not seeing, I would take Havocs back down. I would take Obliterators back down to give them a little bit more variety in the units that they can actually take. That's what I would do for Chaos Space Marines right now. I would perhaps even drop the cost of Chaos Terminators a wee bit as well. So a few very targeted points nerfs with a general points buff to the rest of the army is probably all Chaos Space Marines needs. Let's look at the Team Green, the Orks. We love them. Holy crap, they're suffering. These guys are at a 42% win rate right now, and that's really bad. And I can very, very for real tell you right now that Orks are in trouble. And it has almost nothing to do with points. I can build an Ork list that gives me 21 points, it gives me 21 units, and gives me tons of hitting power. The points are not the problem, with a few very exceptional exceptions. So Meganobs, for example, 40 points for what they do is bullshit. Like, they need to go back down to 50, especially since they got their rule nerfed. Take them back down to 30 points each. 40, 30, 30. Squig Hogs, perhaps a little too expensive. They could do with a little bit of a points reduction. Now, here's the thing that we really need to do for Orks, in my opinion. First off, I want to change the WA to the command phase. Having at the beginning of the battle round is a big problem, especially when you are going second, because your opponent gets full knowledge that this is your only go turn in the game, and all they have to do is back up if you declare WA. So we need to switch it to the command phase so your opponents cannot plan on it. You only get one, so it needs to be effective. Give it to the command phase. 2. Hogs need to either hit on 2s or give them an innate AP2. AP2 makes a lot more reasonable, especially since they are specifically designed to be hunting monsters and vehicles. They need a way to pierce through an Armor of Contempt tank. So they just have to. Like, when these things that are specifically made, their entire purpose of being is to kill tanks, and they go into a 2-up armor save tank with Armor of Contempt, and they literally can't cause a single wound with an entire blob. It's absolute nonsense. So they need that innate AP2, I believe. When they lost the Knob who was leading them, the Knob on Smash a Squig, and it was integrated into the unit, that was a dramatic hit to the power of that unit, and they're still too expensive. Then the next things that we need to do is we need to look at keywords. They need cleaning up for the Orks. Flash Gits, for example, need the Knob keyword. Then they can benefit from stratagems in Bully Boys, for example, which means that you can't only take, Mega Knobs and Knobs. There's other things that you can do. Zodgrod needs the Snag a keyword so that he can benefit more into Big Hunt. Speaking about the Big Hunt, we need to just remove the Warlord limitation. It should be monster, vehicle, or character. Do that, and you're making a huge difference in the way the game is played. And then lastly, I would look at some of the other detachments which just straight up can't be played, like the Cult of Speed, which, man, I don't remember, but the Cult of Speed has something like an abysmal, like 20% win rate in it. Listen, Cult of Speed special rule is Speed Freaks units get advance and shoot. Why not just give the entire army advance and shoot, like literally every other detachment in the game gets? So take Bringers of Flame, everyone gets advance and shoot. Why doesn't Cult of Speed everyone get advance and shoot? What, we only give it to the units that are actually straight up bad in the army? It's silly. Give them, just be consistent, Games Workshop. Give your codexes rules that are consistent. If you're gonna like gatekeep behind keywords, gatekeep behind keywords. If you're not going to gatekeep behind keywords, don't do it then. Don't specifically do it for some armies and not for others. It's very, very silly to me. So I would say that Cult of Speed just needs to give the entire army advance and shoot, just like every other codex gets. You make these changes, I'd be willing to bet we're going to see Orks win rates start to soar, and we'll be right back up to that 50% before you know it. I got two more for you guys. We get Space Marines, who are doing an abysmal 41% win rate, and this is historically the hardest to balance faction in the game. Not fashion. Ignore that. Like, this guy knows grammar. So, we need to figure out how to make vanilla Marines good. But the problem is if we make vanilla Marines good with like targeted points buffs, all these things, your divergent chapters become absolutely insane. So, how do we do it? Well, first off, I do think we need some points reductions. Just straight up, some things are too expensive. But there's another thing that also has to happen, and I doubt it will come here, but this is my wish list, and this is how I would balance the game. When we look at like someone like Dark Angels have a 48% win rate, but the specific list that's running 3 bricks of Deathwing Knights with Eradicators with Fire Discipline inside a Land Raider Redeemer in Gladius, that list itself has something stupid like a 70% win rate. So how do we fix this? Well, here's what I do. Divergent chapters, so Blood Angels, Space Wolves, once they get a codex, Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, all these things that get their own individual codexes, Black Templars, for example, do not let them use Codex Space Marines detachments. Boom. Because it's not the Divergent chapter that's the problem. It's you are running the Divergent chapter in Gladius. That's the problem. So if we do this, just make them, they have to use the detachments in their books. I promise you, you're going to see some much better ways to balance Space Marines as a faction. Make sure Blood Angels have to use their 3 detachments. If there's a problem with them, balance those detachments. If there's a problem with Dark Angels, balance those detachments. And we will see things being totally fine. Space Marines can have their own detachments. You don't have to separate the points, but you do need to separate the detachments, and that's how I would fix Space Marines versus the Divergent chapter issue. But your vanilla Space Marines certainly will need absolutely some points changes. And then lastly, for the lowest win rate army in the game right now, we have the Gene Stealer Cults, and they are at a 40% win rate. I would say your Adelan Jackals could definitely decrease that in cost a little bit, and I would definitely put a big costy buff to your Aberrants. Your Aberrants need to go down fairly substantially in order for them to be really usable. Now, here's the deal about Gene Stealer Cults. I'm not sure a 40% win rate is really representative of how the power of the army is right now. Right now, they have an amazing new rule that would change in the less balanced data slate. I believe it was the balanced data slate that did it, where you can arrive from Cult Ambush in Deep Strike. That is exceptionally powerful, and I think it really does change the game, and I really think that a lot of Gene Stealer Cults players have probably just been beat down since the release of that codex that they have kind of given up all faith. So I'd say if we just give them a few targeted points buffs, they could take the rest of the rules, which are actually already quite good, and they can really start to soar with them. So that's where I would start. I would start by giving a very big targeted buff to the Aberrant, a targeted buff to the Jackals, perhaps. There may be 1 or 2 other things out there that I'm not really thinking about right now, but then I would like to see how that does before I buff them even more, because Gene Stealer Cults are one of those armies that just is historically very hard to balance. So, guys, this is my list, this is my wish list of what I want to see in the points or balance status light update. There's a bunch of armies I didn't talk about. If I didn't talk about your army, it is because you are right within that perfect window that GW likes it at, and it's basically fine. Maybe 5 points here, 5 points there. But overall, most of those armies are right within the targeted win rate window. And everything I spoke about today here is the things that actually need to change. So if you agree with me, or if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments down below. And I would absolutely be happy to fight with you in the comments, because that's what everyone loves to do. I'm going to end it here. Hope everyone has an amazing weekend. And you can probably catch me later tonight playing some Space Marine 2. So until then, cheers.